Nathaniel Reed stood in the middle of the beauty counter holding 3 lipsticks, 2 concealers, and an eyeshadow palette he couldn't identify right side up. Rumpled shirt, bewildered eyes. The kind of man, Scarlett Hayes decided in about 4 seconds, who shows up at the last minute and calls it trying. Last minute. Careless. Already forgiven himself before he'd even bought the wrong thing. She had already made up her mind when his phone rang. He turned away from the shelf, lowered his head, and whispered, "Don't cry, Chloe. I promise I'll bring something home tonight, something to help you feel as beautiful as Mom always said you were." Scarlett's heart went still. The beauty counter stretched the full length of the mall's ground floor, lit from every angle in that particular shade of white that made everything look brighter and more expensive than it was. Nathaniel had been there for 20 minutes, moving between shelves with his phone held up and a blurry screenshot he couldn't read, asking questions that no one in the store quite knew how to answer. He had asked a passing associate whether a particular concealer was the kind that covered red marks on sensitive skin, and the associate had pointed him in 3 directions in the span of 6 minutes. Scarlett had watched most of it. She was there for a specific blush shade and had intended to be gone in under 10 minutes. She had stayed because something about the man irritated her in a specific, familiar way, the way certain kinds of carelessness do when you have been on the receiving end of it long enough to recognize it from across a room. She was still holding the blush tester when she saw his hand. He had turned back to the shelf after the call, reached for the concealer he'd been circling for the past quarter hour, and his hand was not entirely steady, not shaking, just the kind of unsteady that happens when someone has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and the weight has finally started to show in the small muscles. Scarlett set the blush tester down. For the first time that evening, she wondered if she had gotten this wrong. Elizabeth Reed had died on a Tuesday in November, 14 months earlier, on a stretch of highway she had driven 100 times. The other driver ran a light. The impact was on the passenger side, where 9-year-old Chloe was sitting, and by some specific and terrible geometry, Elizabeth took the full weight of the collision on her side, while her daughter survived with a long laceration that began at her left temple and curved down along her cheekbone toward her jaw. Chloe had lived. Elizabeth had not. He had been a good husband. He had been, and continued to try to be, a good father, but Elizabeth had moved through the domestic world with a kind of effortless grace that Nathaniel had always admired from a respectful distance. She knew how to make Chloe feel beautiful before the child had language for what beautiful meant. She knew which colors made her daughter's eyes catch the light, and which sounds made her laugh when she was sad. Nathaniel knew how to fix a leaking pipe and hold Chloe's hand in the dark when she had bad dreams. But the particular vocabulary of being a girl in the world that had always been Elizabeth's country, and he was a visitor who'd never learned the customs. In the year after the accident, Chloe had grown quiet in ways that worried him more than tears would have. She stopped looking in mirrors. She kept her hair loose and forward. When family photos were taken at Christmas, she angled herself. When other girls talked about their appearances with the frank vocabulary of preteens, Chloe went still and found reasons to be somewhere else. He told her she was beautiful. He told her the scar didn't matter. She accepted these words with the patience of a child who loves the person saying them but understands, on some level, that the person doesn't quite know what they're talking about. 3 weeks before she died, Elizabeth had taken his hand in both of hers and said, "If Chloe ever starts to feel like she isn't beautiful anymore, you have to be the one who reminds her that's not true. Not in a big way. Just don't let her believe it." He had nodded the way you nod when you're agreeing to something you assume will never be necessary. He had been wrong, and now, standing in a beauty store he had never set foot in during his previous 38 years, holding products he did not understand, he was trying to keep a promise that had seemed simple when it was made, and had turned out to be the hardest thing he'd ever been asked to do. The event had started as something Chloe genuinely wanted. Her music teacher, Mrs. Hargrove, had been patient and careful in the way she recruited her, telling Chloe specifically that she had a voice worth hearing, and that the evening wasn't about appearances at all, it was about sound. For a few weeks, Chloe had practiced. She had chosen a song. She had let herself, in the privacy of her room in the evenings, begin to want it. Then a classmate, not a cruel child, just a thoughtless one, had said in passing, during a conversation about the photo portion of the evening, that a little concealer would probably help Chloe's scar show up less in pictures. The girl hadn't meant it as a wound. She'd offered it as practical information, the way children sometimes offer the most cutting observations in the register of helpfulness. But Chloe had come home that afternoon, with the particular silence that Nathaniel had learned to recognize as grief wearing a quiet mask. And by dinner she had told him, in a voice trying very hard to be casual, that she didn't want to go to the performance. He had let her talk around it for an hour. Then she told him what her classmate had said, and the silence that followed, where she didn't cry but her eyes went very still, was the silence that broke something in him. He spent the following days turning the problem over in his mind, the way he turned problems at work, looking for the angle that would yield. He found one of Elizabeth's old makeup bags in the closet shelf. She had kept a smaller one for Chloe, for school concerts and holiday photos, and inside was a concealer he remembered seeing Elizabeth use. Light. Gentle. Not about disguise. Just about lifting the light a little. He texted Elizabeth's old friend Dana, who understood that world the way Elizabeth had. Dana sent back a list of 3 products and specific instructions. He looked up tutorials. He watched, with the intense concentration of a man approaching an unfamiliar technical problem, 4 videos on the subject of coverage for scarring. He called the school and asked Mrs. Hargrove if Chloe had officially withdrawn. She hadn't. He asked her to give him one more day. By Thursday evening, Nathaniel drove to the mall 40 minutes before closing with a blurry screenshot, a folded receipt with illegible notes, and the particular determination of a man who has made a promise and intends to keep it, regardless of how conspicuously out of his depth he looks while trying. And that was when Chloe sent him a text. He read it in the aisle, between the eyeshadow palettes and the setting sprays. It said, "If you can't find it, it's really okay, Dad. I'm used to being on the outside of things anyway." He stood very still for a moment. Then he kept looking. Scarlett stepped up beside him, not from the angle of someone reaching past him, but from the angle of someone who had decided to come directly. "I owe you an apology," she said. Quiet, level, the kind of levelness that cost something. "What I said earlier about the person not feeling appreciated. I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm sorry." He looked at her for a second, then gave a small nod. "It's fine," he said. And he clearly meant it, no undercurrent, no wound on display. He just meant it was fine. That mattered to her, the uncomplicated way he accepted it. "Can I ask who you're shopping for?" she said. He hesitated. Then he set 2 of the lipsticks down and said, "My daughter. She's 11. She has a scar from an accident. She has a school event tomorrow, and I'm trying to find something that would cover it, gently. Not completely, just enough." He looked at the shelf. "I don't really know what I'm doing." "No," Scarlett said, not unkindly. "I can see that." He almost smiled. Almost. She looked at the products he was holding, then made a quiet assessment that was nothing like the one she'd made 40 minutes ago. She had spent 3 years as a creative consultant for a cosmetics brand, specializing in inclusive ranges, which had given her a detailed understanding of products designed for sensitive and compromised skin. She knew the camouflage lines. She knew which cushion foundations gave luminosity without weight. "What tone is her skin?" she asked. Nathaniel pulled up a photo on his phone. Chloe at Christmas, laughing, her hair pulled back for once, the scar visible in pink against her cheek. A beautiful child, clearly unaware in that moment that anyone was taking her picture. Scarlett looked at the photo a moment longer than strictly necessary. Then she turned to the shelf and began to move efficiently through it. She chose a gentle primer, a concealer 2 shades lighter than the skin's surface tone, the way you work with a scar's elevation rather than against it. A cushion foundation with a satin finish, not matte, which flattens, but satin, which lets light through. A small eyeshadow palette in warm neutrals. A setting mist, light enough that a child wouldn't feel it. She lined them up on the counter in the order of application, then found a pen in her bag and wrote the steps out clearly on the back of a bookmark. She handed it to Nathaniel alongside the 5 products. "The goal isn't to hide the scar," she said. "It's to let her face have more options in the light. Does that make sense?" "Yes," he said. "That makes sense." He thanked her the way people thank each other when they mean it, without needing to make much of it. And there was something in that, the plainness of it, the absence of any agenda that she found she did not know how to file away in any familiar category. "If tonight doesn't go well," she said, raising her voice slightly as he moved toward the register, Call me. He paused, turned, looked at her with what might have been surprise, or might have been recognition. He nodded once, and then he walked on. The apartment was quiet when Nathaniel got home. Chloe had fallen asleep on the couch, with the television murmuring low, a half-eaten bowl of cereal, on the coffee table. He covered her with the blanket from the armchair, the one that had been Elizabeth's, and sat down at the kitchen table with the bag of products. He spread them out in front of him. He read Scarlett's bookmark twice. He looked at the photo of Elizabeth on the refrigerator, the one from the summer before the accident, her face tipped toward the sun. She would have known exactly what to do with these. She would have made the whole thing feel like an adventure rather than a repair job. He didn't know how to do any of that. He only knew how to try. He practiced on his forearm. The concealer blended in a way that surprised him lighter than he'd expected. More like adjusting the light than applying paint. He tried the small sponge that had come in the package. The sponge was better. He was still at the table at 11:30 when Chloe appeared in the doorway in her pajamas. She stood and looked at him, this tired man sitting at the kitchen table with makeup products arranged in a row. Product on his forearms, his face doing the complicated thing faces do when they are trying to look fine and are not quite succeeding. She came to the table and sat across from him without saying anything. "You don't have to go tomorrow," he said. "I want you to know that." She nodded slowly. "But if I want to go, then I'm going to figure this out. I just need a little more time." Chloe looked at the bookmark with Scarlett's handwriting. "Did someone help you?" she asked. "A woman at the store," he said. She knew what she was talking about. Chloe considered this. Then, "Can we try?" His first attempt was too heavy, the coverage sitting thick at the edge of the scar, in a way that made it more visible by contrast. Chloe looked at herself in the hand mirror and went very still. That stillness made his stomach drop. He pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment, feeling the absurdity of calling a stranger at 11:40 in the evening for makeup advice. Then he called. She picked up. He apologized for the hour. She said it was fine. "Less product than you think," she said. "You're not filling a gap, you're just taking the edge off. Think of it less like covering and more like evening. And don't try to make it disappear. Just help her light come through. That's the only job." He tried again. Lighter-handed this time, less determined to fix everything completely, and the result was different. Softer, more like her. Chloe looked in the mirror for a long time. Then she put it down and looked up at him. "Do I look like I did when Mom was still here?" she said quietly. He couldn't speak for a second. He put his hand over hers on the table and said, "You look like yourself," which is what she loved most. After the call ended, Scarlett sat in her living room with the lights low and didn't turn the television on. The apartment was arranged exactly as she liked it. Clean lines, deliberate choices, nothing that hadn't been chosen carefully. She had lived alone for 3 years since ending the engagement, and she had furnished the space the way she furnished the rest of her life, with precision and self-sufficiency, leaving no vacancy that could be mistaken for invitation. Nathaniel Reed did not fit any category she had designed those arrangements to protect her from. She had been in love with a man who said all the right things in exactly the right register and who was, underneath those things, profoundly absent. Absent during her mother's illness, during the long dark stretch after a loss she hadn't talked to anyone about, during the ordinary moments when a person just needs another person to be fully there and not performing being there. She had ended things with more composure than she felt, and moved herself into a life that depended entirely on her own resources. She had decided this was enough. But Nathaniel was doing something she recognized at the bone level as the thing she had wanted all along. Not impressively, not with technique. He was trying with his whole ungainly, sleep-deprived, makeup-on-his-sleeve body to do something he had no preparation for, because someone he loved needed it done. He wasn't asking for credit. He wasn't managing a version of himself for an audience. She remembered his words on the phone in the store. "The face you were born with was made to be held up, not down." She had been replaying them. She thought about her own years of angles. The subtle ones. The ways she had learned to present certain parts of herself and turn others slightly away. She had told herself this was self-possession. Tonight she was less certain. She looked at the calendar on her phone, at the consultation she'd been planning for 2 weeks. She looked at it for a moment. Then she moved it. The morning was overcast, and the school parking lot was already crowded by the time Nathaniel and Chloe arrived. He had done the concealer at the kitchen table while Chloe sat very still and trusted him in a way that made him feel the weight of the responsibility acutely. He had added the cushion afterward, light-handed, and the result, he thought, nervously was closer to what he intended than his first attempt had been. That was what mattered most. Chloe was quiet in the car, not the withdrawn quiet he had learned to dread, but a different kind, tense, anticipatory. The quiet of someone who has made a decision and is holding it carefully. He had been parking when she saw the notification on his phone in the center console. She had already read the visible preview. 2 women discussing the photo portion of the event, and a line that said, in the casual cruelty of people who aren't thinking about who might be reading, that some of the kids were going to need a lot more prep to photograph well. One name mentioned specifically, Chloe's name. The silence in the car was immediate and total. He watched her take the hit. He watched the composure she had assembled that morning begin to come apart at the edges. She reached up and touched her hair. She pulled it forward. I don't want to go in, she said. He turned off the engine. He sat for a moment. Then he turned in his seat so he was facing her directly. Listen to me, he said. I didn't buy those products to change the way you look. I bought them because you said you wanted to go, and I wanted to help you get there. He paused. If someone else's words decide whether you walk into that room, then those words won. And they don't deserve to win. They didn't earn it. She was looking at her hands. But if you don't want to go, he said, very steadily, I'll drive us home right now, and we'll make pancakes and watch whatever you want, all afternoon. I choose you. Not the stage. You. There was a knock on the passenger window. Scarlett was standing in the parking lot. Chloe rolled down the window. Scarlett crouched down to her level and said simply, I heard it's a big day. Chloe looked at her. Someone said I'd need a lot of covering to look good in photos. Scarlett was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when I was about your age, I had a gap between my front teeth that I was certain everyone noticed before they noticed anything else about me. I practiced smiling with my mouth closed for an entire year. She paused. The people who loved me never once mentioned the gap. The people who mentioned the gap were not the ones who loved me. It took me a very long time to learn the difference. Chloe was still for a moment. Then she said, very carefully, if I go in, where are you going to stand, Dad, so I can find you? Nathaniel pointed through the window at the spot directly in front of the stage. Right there, he said. First one you'll see. The backstage area of the school auditorium was the particular chaos of children and parents and teachers, all occupying too small a space, with too many urgent things happening at once. Costumes being adjusted. Children running. A teacher with a clipboard shepherding everyone at a volume that suggested the clipboard was not helping. Nathaniel moved carefully through the space with Chloe's small cosmetics kit and found a quiet corner near the changing area. He crouched down and said, one more check. Scarlett stood a few feet back. This was deliberate. This part belonged to him. He touched the concealer to the edge of the scar with the small sponge, patting lightly, not pressing. He could feel Chloe holding very still under his hands. Stop, Chloe said. He stopped immediately. She took the sponge from him gently. She looked at herself in the small mirror. I don't want to cover all of it, she said. He stayed very still. I just want the light foundation, she said, and she reached into the pouch and found the small eyeshadow compact, the one with the pale silver shade, just a little of this. Here, she pointed to the outer corner of her left eye, the side the scar was on, like a star, next to it, not instead of it. Nathaniel looked at his daughter. She met his eyes in the mirror. Okay, she said. He had to clear his throat. Okay, he said. He used the cushion lightly across her whole face, a base of even light, the way Scarlett had described it. Then he took the smallest brush and touched the silver to the outer corner of Chloe's eye. Just a suggestion of shimmer. A tiny point of deliberate brightness placed precisely alongside the thing she had spent more than a year trying to hide. He stepped back. Chloe looked at herself. She tilted her face a little. She turned it slightly. She looked at the scar, and at the shimmer, and at the way her eye caught the backstage light, and threw it back. She put the mirror down. Good, she said. One word. Quietly, like she meant it. Behind them, Scarlett was looking at the floor, her jaw set, her eyes doing something she was not going to acknowledge in the middle of an elementary school auditorium. A teacher came by and touched Chloe's shoulder. Chloe straightened up. She looked at Nathaniel. "I know where you'll be standing," she said. He put his hand briefly on top of her head. "You don't need to be anyone but Chloe Reed today," he said. That's exactly enough. The auditorium held perhaps 200 people, mostly parents and siblings in folding chairs and along the walls. The stage lights were warm and slightly too bright, casting the children in the golden blur of school events that photographs overexposed and still looks beautiful in an album 20 years later. Nathaniel was standing where he had said he would stand. Scarlett was seated 5 chairs to his right. When the children came out, Chloe was 4th from the left, in the pale blue dress Nathaniel had pressed that morning, burning his hand slightly in the process. She came out looking at the floor. Then she looked up, found her father immediately, and did not look away. She had a good voice. Elizabeth had said so from the time she was very small. Listening now from 2 rows back in a folding chair, Nathaniel understood it completely. Chloe sang her part looking slightly upward, the angle that opened the throat, the angle she'd practiced, the angle that did not hide her face. She did not angle herself away from the light. She stood, both feet flat, and let the light land on her. He could feel it when she made the choice, the small shift in her shoulders that wasn't visible from 20 feet away, but that he recognized in the way fathers recognize the geometry of their children. She had decided. She was there. For the photos, the photographer asked the children to face forward. Chloe, who for over a year had angled herself in every photograph left, into shadows, behind someone taller, turned her face directly to the lens. Her left side, the side with the scar, the side with the small point of silver shimmer at the corner of her eye. Mrs. Hargrove was wiping her eyes in the way teachers do when they're trying not to be seen doing it. When the event ended, the woman from the parent group made her way toward Nathaniel. She said, quietly, "I'm sorry about what I wrote this morning. It was thoughtless. Your daughter is lovely." Nathaniel looked at her, not unkindly. He said, "Children remember what they see in the eyes of grown-ups more than they remember the words. That's worth keeping in mind." She nodded and moved away. Then Chloe came running, still in her blue dress, and hit him with her full weight, arms around his middle, face pressed against his chest. "I think Mom was watching," she said. He held on tighter. He didn't need to answer. When Chloe eventually pulled back and found Scarlett a few feet away, she ran to her too, and Scarlett caught her with both hands on her shoulders, crouching to the right height. Chloe, breathless and radiant, looked up and said, "Will you come have dinner with us? Dad can't really cook, but he's been trying to learn." Scarlett looked up at Nathaniel over Chloe's head. He was watching them with an expression he clearly hadn't arranged for anyone, hadn't intended to be seen, and hadn't moved quickly enough to put away. "I'll come for dinner," Scarlett said. The dinner was pasta, slightly oversalted, with jarred sauce and a salad that had been dressed a little too early and had gone slightly wilted. Nathaniel had set the table carefully. Chloe had changed into her favorite sweatshirt and was already talking about the afternoon before they were all the way through the door. It was not a beautiful dinner. It was a real one. Chloe described the performance in the enthusiastic and slightly chaotic narrative style of children who have decided they want you to understand exactly how something felt. She described the lights and the other kids and Mrs. Hargrove crying and the photograph, which she said she was going to ask for a copy of. She talked for most of the meal and ate around the talking with the cheerful efficiency of someone who has important things to say. Nathaniel refilled water glasses and asked questions at the right moments and watched his daughter with a quietness in his face that had not been there for a very long time. Scarlett ate the slightly wilted salad without remarking on it and listened to Chloe the way she would want someone to listen, with the full weight of attention, not the performance of it. She asked about Mrs. Hargrove, about whether Chloe was planning to do the event next year. Chloe said yes, probably. She said it like a statement, not a question. When Chloe finally ran down and wandered toward the living room, Nathaniel and Scarlett sat across the kitchen table from each other with the remnants of the meal between them, and the apartment was quiet in a way that felt inhabited rather than empty. "I owe you more than I know how to say," Nathaniel said. "You don't," Scarlett said simply. "I judged you first," she said. After a moment. "In the store. Before you said a word, I had already decided who you were. He looked at his water glass. I get that a lot, he said, without self-pity. A man alone in a beauty store buying things he clearly doesn't understand. It's not an unreasonable conclusion. It was still wrong. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. I've gotten good at being misread. It happens when you're doing something that doesn't look like what it is. She nodded slowly. She understood that, in a way she hadn't expected. I think I spent the last few years trying not to misread things, she said. Reading everything too fast, too defensively. Getting the surface right and the rest completely wrong. He looked at her then, a steady, direct look, the kind he gave to things he was taking seriously. You still helped, he said. That counts. Someone helped me once, she said. At a moment when I'd have rather not needed it. I remembered that tonight. They sat with that for a moment. Chloe came back from the living room, carrying something, a photograph in a white frame. Elizabeth in the center, laughing, with Chloe on one side and Nathaniel on the other. She set it on the table between them without explanation. Mom always liked people who did things instead of just saying them, Chloe said. She was looking at Scarlett with the frank, evaluating gaze of a child who has decided to trust but wants it acknowledged that the decision was made carefully. She said those people were rarer. Neither adult spoke. Chloe picked up the frame and went back to the living room, satisfied. Before she left that evening, Scarlett put a small drawstring bag on the kitchen counter. Inside was a gentle cleanser, the cushion foundation, 2 of the eyeshadows from the palette, and the setting mist. Laid on top was a small round mirror in a pink case, and tucked beneath it, an index card. Nathaniel found it after she left, when he was cleaning up. He read it. Then he put it on the counter where Chloe would find it in the morning. It said, "You don't need to cover anything to be beautiful. You already are, even when you're still learning how to be brave." Nathaniel stood at the door for a long moment, after Scarlett had gone, watching the quiet the parking lot made under the amber lights. He was tired in the way people get tired when they've been carrying something heavy, and have only recently set it down. But there was something else there too. Something he hadn't felt in 14 months. Something he hadn't expected and hadn't looked for, and wasn't entirely sure what to do with yet. Not the wild, particular grief of missing Elizabeth, which he still carried and always would. Something different. Something quieter and more preliminary. Something that felt, tentatively, like the beginning of Forward. He turned off the kitchen light and went to check on Chloe. She was already asleep, the blue dress hanging on the back of her door, the small pink mirror on the nightstand beside her. Her hair was loose and unguarded against the pillow. Her face, in the light from the hallway, was turned toward the room. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. There are nights when a tube of concealer, and a line of silver shimmer, and a stranger's careful handwriting on an index card don't change the whole world. They're too small for that. The world is too large and the grief is too deep, and the work is too long. But sometimes those small things change one night. One morning. One photograph. One small person's decision to turn her face to the light instead of away from it. And sometimes, if the timing is right, and the people are paying attention, one night is exactly enough.